kind of stupid when there's anything going on in motion. However, since most broadcast footage wasn't, 24 frames per second, it wasn't a big deal. But with video games that run at like 60 frames per second, or used to run in 60 frames per second,
I sure do love that 30 frames per second Skyrim on my Switch.
That's so cinematic. But yeah, so yeah, no, the 240p business was this creative, was this video trick that I don't remember which was the first manufacturer to come up with it. But what they would do is that they would just show you half of the image, just 240 lines, but in a progressive manner. However, instead of only covering half of the screen, it would stretch out the image, basically drawing, like it would draw a line of video, then not draw anything, then for the next line, draw a line of video, and so on. That would create what was known as the scan line effect. Yeah, so y'all are aware of the idea of scan lines. You've probably seen scan line filters on your brand new Super Nintendo Classic Mini whatever emulator boxes. That's how 240p games used to look on CRTs. A lot of people argue that that's the only true way to experience the games as the developers intended, but I'm not going to get into that business. So basically, wait, hold up, I wasn't done, man.
You want to talk about de-interlacing? Yeah.
I'm about to. So the scan lines are actually the colored lines. The lines that are not being colored in are not the scan lines. A lot of people get this wrong. Don't be one of those. Yeah, what else was I going to say? So yeah, the way this would work on a CRT would be that it would project the electrons, or however those things work, only to the lines that were colored, while the other lines would just simply not turn on. It's kind of like with an OLED display, how it just doesn't turn on the black pixels, but very different. So yeah, you can move on. So the thing about 480i video is that when you put it into an HDTV, since those televisions cannot natively show you a 480i resolution, it would instead upscale it and then de-interlace it. But the upscalers that are found in your consumer LCD TVs are terrible. So if you put in a video feed that was 240p, it would not know what that was. It would go, I think this is 480i. It would attempt to de-interlace the image, so it would grab the odd and even lines from every consecutive millisecond or whatever, and then splice them together. But since they weren't really different, you'd end up with this ugly smushed image, and whenever there was anything in motion, every other line would seem to desync. So if you try playing like a racing game on the original Xbox, let's say, because the original Xbox outputs everything at 480i, unless you're doing 480p, but let's not get into that. Play that on your HD TV, try taking a corner, and you'll see what I mean.
But what about the input lag, Ivan? Why can't I play Smash Brothers on an HD TV?
Well, just by the nature itself of the display, there's going to be input lag. Even if you use a fancy schmancy BenQ monitor or whatever, you're still going to have at least 1 millisecond of projected input lag. There's always more. But when you upscale and de-interlace, that creates extra processing, combined with the fact that your LCD TV has a whole bunch of other post-processing nonsense to make your picture look better, and the store display. It's going to make it slow, and you're not going to be able to play your fighters properly. But okay, let's move on to the next thingy. So yeah, here's the important bit before you start upscaling. So most of you, when you bought your Nintendo 64 or whatever your childhood retro console of choice is, it probably came with those RCA composite cables. So that's the yellow, the white one, and the red one. The white one and the red one are left and right stereo audio channels, while the yellow one was the only one that was actually a video hookup. The problem is that grabs all the video information and puts it in like a single copper wire, and you end up with this ugly smudged image, even if you're playing on a CRT display. Now, if you upgrade from composite, you get as video, which is a pretty big leap in video, since it separates the luma and chroma values, which are the brightness and color values, into two separate wires, and you end up with a much sharper image. But you can do even better. However, in the North American market, we didn't really have RGB CRTs aside from computer ones, but those only do digital resolutions, like, well, it's not a digital resolution, but 480p and up, right? So, however, there are some RGB displays in North America, which were the professional video monitors made by Sony. These cost a lot of money on Craigslist, depending on who's selling them. I managed to get a PVM 20M2U from some random lady in DC completely for free. It was a weird experience, but this was like 4 years ago, before people realized how valuable these things were. because like they have a heck of a lot of horizontal lines of video, so some PVMs can even do not digital resolutions, HD resolutions, which is pretty cool, and they take in RGB inputs. So I could tell you a little story of how I got my first PVM and how weird that was, if you'll have the time.
Yeah, I mean, we're only 6 minutes in.
Oh, really, man?
Yeah.
I'm just blazing through this. Yeah, so I saw it on Craigslist, and at that point in time, I didn't know how valuable these things were. All I knew is that I had gone on a few CRT threads in the VR board of 4chan, and they were like, yeah, these things are the best. And I was like, well, some lady's giving it away. So I went to DC with my brother. I drive up to this lady's house in the middle of nowhere, and she's like, oh, yeah, just come around the back. I was like, okay, so I drive around the back, and she's like, come behind me. I have the TV in a little shed behind my house. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. So I was like, how much do I want this thing? Well, Fortune told me I must have it, so I'll get it. So I get to the shed, and I look at it, and she's like, open the door. Don't worry. Nobody's gonna murder you. I was like, I don't feel any better at all. This lady looks like she belonged in one of those Hostel movies. But I opened the door, and there it was, sitting on a little trolley. And I was like, wow. So I carry it all the way to my car. She helped me load it in. She's like, aren't you glad nobody murdered you? And I was like, okay. But yeah, then I took it home, and then I found out how valuable the thing was, and I was like, heck yeah. So I tend to flip these sometimes on Craigslist and resell them for crazy value. So yeah, I scalp things that haven't been in production for 20 years. Come at me.
No, don't sell yourself short. You also scalp amiibos.
I used to, and then Nintendo was like, nah, we're just going to produce more. And I was like, ah, snap. So I ended up with a box full of them, and like $300 short. But yeah, these things are the best. Oh, one other thing. The RGB stuff, you don't need to put that one, but the RGB stuff, Japan and Europe got those in their consumer sets. And I see your hand up, sir. What is it?
I wanted to ask, is the RGB a different type of cable?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's different cables since it's a signal type. The one most people are aware of is VGA, but that's not commonly used for 240p and 480i. In Europe, they had the Euroscard cable, which I don't have a picture of, but it's a really ugly cable that has a whole bunch of pins, but, it gives you the best image. And in Japan, they had the JP21 standard, which looks the same as Euroscard, but it's wired completely different on the inside. I don't know why this happened, but don't mix and match when using an upscaler, because you can mess up your hardware. But
How you,
no, I haven't. No. That involved a power supply. But
Where do you get that kind of cable in this day and age?
eBay. There's that one lady that like custom makes some of them. I forgot what her eBay store is called, but she keeps going on like hiatus, like she was Hunter x Hunter or something. Yeah, but I mean, you'll find them. I have plenty of research materials for y'all. Yeah, so I don't even know why we have this slide, but
Well, we'd had it because you were talking about things that were like, if you just wanted to go out and buy the cables, assuming you had the TV that would hook up to
okay, yeah.
it.
So assuming you have a CRT display with the best possible inputs, there are different options depending on what console you're using. So on the Super Nintendo, depending on which revision of the hardware you have, because Nintendo's pretty tricky with this stuff, if you have one of the earlier revisions or everything up till the one-chip consoles, they output RGB natively, so you could either go with composite cable if you don't care, you could go S-Video, or even buy a SCART cable, plug it in, and it'll work. If you have a Super Nintendo Mini, however, or Junior, I don't know what's the proper name for it, it won't natively give you RGB. You'll need to mod it for RGB, and there's plenty of people on eBay that do that for you for reasonable prices. But yeah, there's also the people over at, oh my God, what was their website called? The folks who made the component cables. Somebody tell me. One of you must know.
I got nothing.
HD Retrovision? Yes. The folks over at HD Retrovision made their own component cables for the Super Nintendo, and they sell them occasionally. They also made them for the Genesis as well. However, you have to have a console that's capable of outputting RGB for the thing to do a component, because it basically just has a little chip inside that converts it over to a component. So, oh yeah, I forgot to talk about components. Silly me. So in North America in like I think either late 90s or early 2000s, CRT TVs around like 20 inches and up had component hookups in the back, which a lot of people mistake for RGB because the ports are, red, green, and blue. However, that connection is, it uses RCA cables, and it's just as sharp as RGB, but it works completely differently, so you can't really mix and match. And in terms of color accuracy, it's not as good, but if you mess with your TV's color settings, you can get around the same thing. And component's also pretty cool because you can even do up to like 1080i in terms of resolution. So back when like the first Xbox 360 came out, that was your only way to do HD. They didn't have HDMI because they weren't forward thinking like Sony or whatever. But I don't know. Oh yeah, the PS2 will play your PS1 and PS2 games, either in a composite SVD or RGB or even component, which is a nice added bonus of playing on a PS2. The Xbox also has all these cables, but the Xbox, the native Xbox games all output at 480i or above, so But yeah. Oh yeah, I should have talked more about the 480i stuff. Basically starting with the Saturn, PS1, and N64, a lot of games started seeing 480i thrown in there, either the whole game being 480i or some menus being in 480i, and then after that with the Dreamcast and on, everything was 480i. Though the Dreamcast can play some Capcom fighters in 240p, but what else? Yeah, the Wii is also a pretty good way of playing all the games in their original resolution if you're playing on a CRT, since the virtual console games can actually output at 240p if you pop open the menu and like hold the one button. I don't remember what was the exact method, but you can get them to output at 240p. The only problem is that the North American Wii will not do RGB. And you know why? Because Nintendo disabled it in the software. They went out of their way to prevent you from having the best hookup for your CRT because Nintendo doesn't like the North American market. But don't quote me on that. That's not official. It's not like Reggie told me or something. But yeah, and the component video output of the Wii is inferior to the GameCube's, but I mean, it's pretty marginal. And if you want to get a GameCube to play your GameCube games and you want a component cable, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Yes. The B? Well, if you mod your Wii, like you soft mod it, you can use the RGB SCART cable. You can just buy a European one for a European Wii. You could buy a European Wii and use that, but I mean, I guess that makes sense.
What about region locks, Ivan?
I'm kidding.
Actually, I don't know. I don't remember. Yeah, I think the Wii is region locked,
Yeah,
but
because
I don't know.
Nintendo doesn't
Everyone
love us.
soft mods their Wii anyways, and all the emulators output 240p. But that's not what this panel's about. Yeah, and the GameCube can do composite. I think S-video. No RGB SCART for the North American market, but you can get component cables. However, the funny thing with the digital output on the GameCube, because
Oh God, no. God, why?
well, he fixes that. The GameCube has a component output, but not through the regular Nintendo AV multi-out
God.
that all the consoles have.
There we go. We're good.
Shut your mouth. Anyways,
I didn't plug it in, that's why.
that's okay. I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so the GameCube can output via component and even give you some games in 480p. The problem is that instead of doing it analog like everybody else does, Nintendo was trying to think a little bit too far into the future. And on the early models of the GameCube, you'll notice that there's a separate slot next to the common AV multi-out, which outputs digital video. However, the GameCube component cables have a chip in them that converts that digital video into analog video. So why is it outputting in digital? Apparently it's because Nintendo wanted to do like VR headsets back then or something, and then decided not to at the last minute because they realized that would be a bad idea. But yeah, so the Nintendo GameCube component cables have a proprietary switch in them. I mean, not switch, chip in them that makes them hella expensive because they were only sold through the Nintendo website back in the early 2000s, and like 30 people bought them. So now they go for like $300 on eBay. However, here's a little trick I learned. You should buy the D-terminal cable, which is the Japanese YPVPR component standard, which is the same exact thing, except it just has a different connector. And then you can buy a $5 adapter that'll adapt it for the RCA jacks that the American TVs have, and you'll save yourself up to like $100. But that's just what I did. Also, the GameCube can't do SCART. I think I mentioned that. Go on. So anyways, so when you're going to start into your upscaling journey to have your 240p and 480i content look very pretty on an HDTV, you'll need to get an upscaler. What an upscaler does is that it grabs the horizontal line count, then it doubles it, triples it, or even quadruples it, depending on what kind of upscaler you're using. So it gets rid of that scanline effect, but instead it gives you sharp graphics that look just like it was an emulator. However, first you're gonna try not to spend a lot of money. So you'll go on Amazon and you'll be like, oh, RGB to HDMI, and you'll find that thing. It costs $40, and it does upscale to 720p. And if you're not moving anything, it looks very pretty. The problem is that it doesn't know how to interpret 240p correctly, so it'll try to deinterlace it. It'll add a heck load of input lag. You won't be able to beat Gutsman's stage in Mega Man 1. And it'll look pretty, and it'll do a better job than your TV's native upscaler, but I wouldn't really recommend it. But I mean, I think Adam Koralik like swears by it, so I respect him. So try whatever you want. Move on. So then the FrameMeister, the Microsoft XRGB Mini FrameMeister is the standard for video game upscalers nowadays, although it's going out of production, I think. The company that made it, Microsoft, not to be confused with Microsoft, is a random Japanese company that makes video processors and I think some other stuff. And they were very well known for their XRGB upscalers. I think their best one was the XRGB3. And then after that, they decided to make this one specifically for gamers. And it'll upscale, recognizing 240p perfectly. It'll take in composite, Euroscar, JP21 RGB. It'll take in component on the back, although you'll need the D-sub adapter. It does S-video as well, but honestly, if you're going to upscale, go the RGB route. And yeah, it costs like from $300 to $400 depending on where you get it. I definitely recommend Solaris Japan. Look it up; it's super cool. And yeah, outputs in HDMI. I don't know what else to say about it. It's the best. Also, recently, in what was it, Video Game Perfection, I think is the name of the website, they developed a open source upscaler known as the Open Source Scan Converter, or the OSSC. I've got one. I was going to bring it to demo it, and I plugged in the wrong power supply and fried it. So, I learned that 7 volts can make a heck of an effect on a circuit board. But the whole schematics for it are open source, so you can build one of your own if you want to, or you can buy it for around 170 euros from their website, which is a lot cheaper. So I personally prefer this over the FrameMeister because it has no input lag. The FrameMeister has give or take 3 frames of input lag, while the OSSC has like no frame buffer, whatever that is, so it's got no perceivable input lag. And the latest revision of it, I don't know if it outputs HDMI. I think it only does DVI because they didn't want to get like the license to use an HDMI connector, but point is, just plug in a DVI adapter. So yeah, depending on which upscaler you use, you'll get different results. I mean, it'll usually look just as sharp, but sometimes color differences might be different. You can mess with those. Here's the FrameMeister compared with the OSSC. Oh yeah, a big shout out to Bob from Retro RGB for letting us use screenshots from his website. Just had to say that. Yeah, you can move on. Let's see. Yeah, as I mentioned, with different models for different consoles, you might have a hard time getting the RGB to work. Like, for example, the Genesis has a great RGB and all of its models support RGB out, except if you're using the 32X and the Sega CD, it gets a bit complicated, but I think you can still get RGB using the same cable out of all those. Although do make sure you buy the proper cable for whichever model of the Genesis you've got. The composite output on the Genesis is actually really bad for some reason, but we don't care about composite here. On the Super Nintendo, it was the complete opposite. On the early models of the Super Nintendo, the RGB output was actually pretty ugly. Well, comparatively ugly, but not as bad as composite. Well, the composite output was generally pretty good. Later revisions of the consoles, which are referred to as the one-chip consoles, have a better RGB output, but you can always RGB mod any of them with this fan-made board that gives you the best possible, sharpest RGB output. The Dreamcast was the best console ever made when it came to this because Sega was like, hey, you can plug in a VGA box to it and play all your games in 480p. Don't worry about that. There are these dudes over in somewhere in Europe online that sell different VGA boxes for the Dreamcast, and they're like $50 one. Is it $50? I remember. It's called the Toro box. That one also has an RGB output, RGB SCART port on the side, so you can use it to output into your CRT in 480i or 240p for some Capcom fighters, and you'll get like arcade perfect RGB on your CRT. Or if you move it over to FrameMeister OSSC or a different video processor, you can get it all in HD, looking super pretty. And yeah, the PlayStation 1 and 2 just works, you know. They have RGB, PS2 has component, those cables are cheap as heck. No extra assembly required. Although if you're using a PS2 and you want to do RGB, make sure you go in the little menu when you boot up your PS2 and make sure you set it to RGB rather than YPVPR, because YPVPR is for component. Otherwise the color will look funky. Move on. So as everybody knows, if you want to play your retro games in HD, you can always go with the official methods by, you know, the Nintendo Virtual Console, Xbox Live Arcade, the Sony PlayStation Network, PS1 Classics, all that stuff. And that's all good and swell and no problem with that. The interesting thing about those services, though, is that on the PlayStation Network PS1 Classics, some of them don't look as pretty as if you actually inserted the physical North American game disc into your console. Like if you compare some games, using the disc looks better. All PS3s have a PS1 emulator in them, so, you know, they'll play your discs just fine if you want to go that route. That's the cheapest way to play PS1 in HD. The Nintendo Virtual Console is a mixed bag. I find that the Wii U Virtual Console gives you these muddy, ugly-looking RGB in HD, but it works. Now, there are also, I'm just going to skip a bit forward over there, there are HDMI mods for the NES and the Nintendo 64. Those generally cost a lot, but if those are like the consoles you want to play, you can get them modded to output 720p, or I don't know if they also do 1080p. But for the N64, it's a godsend, especially because that console is generally not the best with a video output. Oh yeah, the N64 also requires to be modded to have a RGB output. Forgot to mention that. Another way is what I brought here to showcase instead of the OSSC, which is the Retro USB AVS. Much like the Analog NT Mini, it's just like an FPGA that's programmed to imitate the NES hardware. So you just plug in your cartridge and it'll read it just like as if you were using the original hardware. However, it natively outputs in 720p. The interesting thing is that unlike what most people know, like the Retron 5 or whatever, this is actually playing it off the cartridge. Things like the Retron 5, like, you know, those multi-consoles that you can plug in your cartridges in and play the games, those are just Android-based emulator boxes that dump the ROM from your cartridge. They're not actually playing the game. So, and they have input lag. Yeah, there's also the Analog NT, the original one, which cost like $400, which was this nice little metal case that was made from actual parts from defunct NESs that would play your NES games in, you know, HD, and also I think it also outputs 240p RGB, or maybe that's just the NT Mini. But the Analog NT Mini is an FPGA rather than original NES hardware. But you'll find that out on your own if you really care to go that route. I have some suggested resources if you want to, you know, hear everything I just said in a much more concise manner with pretty visuals and a slower pace. I would definitely suggest My Life in Gaming channel. What's their faces? Corey and Try, who are the guys that run that channel, have excellent production value for all their videos. They have like a new video out every month, and they even do live streams and showcase a lot of games upscaled. I mean, definitely check out their channel as a first stop. There's also RetroRGB.com. As I already mentioned, Bob let us use some of his screenshots. He's got all of this information written down in nice categories, you know, laid out pretty nicely for you to look at. If you're interested in looking at other upscalers that are not the ones I've mentioned, like other video processors that were not intended originally for gaming but are cheaper and do 480p or even better, look at Fudo's websites. Just go on hazard-city.de. He also has a subsection to his website about downscalers. So if you're interested in plugging in an HD console and downscaling it to 240p, yes. Well, his blog is in German, but those two websites are in English. Don't worry about that, but good eye there. Yeah, I definitely suggest checking out the downscaling thing if you're interested in that. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole that doesn't really have as much of a community as upscaling does. And if you're interested in PVMs or BVMs and all those professional CRTs, check out Phone Dork's channel. The guy goes into heavy technical detail and takes some beautiful captures of the scan lines and all that in motion. And he also reviews the HDMI mods for the N64 and NES in heavy detail. Do be warned, he swears a lot in his videos, but I mean, we're all adults here. I think that's everything I had for that. So if you all want to check out the AVS now, I can put that on. And if you have more questions, I'd be willing to answer everything to the best of my ability. Yes?
You mentioned that most of these solutions like Meister, upscalers are only like 720p. Is there any movement towards higher resolutions?
Well, not that I know, since this is such a niche community, but I assume they'll do that. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the folks with the OSSC eventually, switch over to that if they ever do DisplayPort on it. But I find that there's a point to diminishing returns with this stuff. Since pixels are so big and square, there's not really much detail to go for. But I mean, I personally prefer to go with 720p over 1080p, since 720p is a perfect line triple of 240p. Well, with 1080p, if you're using an OSSC, you could go like, what is it, 800, no. You can multiply it by 5 and then just fix the overscan settings to get a sharper image without losing the aspect ratio, but go ahead. I mean, yeah, I mean, you can do that. I mean, if you do 720p, that actually multiplies by 3 to give you an exact 4K image. And when it comes to upscaling HD content, consumer HD TVs don't really put that much input lag into that process. So yeah, that's personally how I play at home. Though I just switched from a 4K TV to a bigger 1080p TV, but
Hey,
is that not popping up?
No, it's not. But also, given the theme for MAGFest this year, I think we have to
go with that game
we have to
instead?
do Kirby instead.
Okay. Oh, the cool thing about the AVS is that it also plays Famicom cartridges,
Just pop out.
and it has the multi-tap built into it, and it even lets you use the yeah, just pop it out.
Okay.
It's
I didn't
kind of
wanna
tight
break
in
the
there. Yeah. These cards are all below it. Good. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Kirby's Dream Land 3. Yay. Okay. God damn it.
Oh,
Okay,
God.
no, that's normal. Yeah. That happens when the cartridge is not put in correctly. Well, now as you see, it works just like the original hardware. We're all the same hardware glitches. Yeah. I mean, emulation's more reliable. I mean, you guys want to play your original cartridges. You don't want to be a filthy pirate. Shut your mouth. Hold up. Wait, did you change the input?
It's like,
Oh, okay. Okay, wait. Bring it back to HDMI. Yesterday I was trying out Super Mario Bros. Yeah, okay, hold up. It's the cartridge, don't worry.
Well, at the very least, you go back and get your $10 back. But
Huh? No, it's okay. No, this happens. These cartridges are old. What do you expect? Yesterday I was trying this out with Super Mario Bros. USA, and as I was playing, every time the screen would change, there'd be more visual glitches, and I was like, what is this, Zalgo? Okay,
all right. Now, how do I start?
just press A. Hopefully it works, it might not. What on earth? Can you cycle between them?
no.
Is it stuck? What the heck? What do you do? Let me just reset.
I hope this is really selling you on going to use these methods.
I mean, the AVS, yeah, the AVS costs like $180, so it's like the best price thing for this. Plus, these cartridges I just bought from the dealer's room yesterday, and you know how these things go. I mean, they're old. Some of these have yeah, some guy used to own this 30 years ago. Yeah, what's up?
for the APS,
Yeah, actually, I owned an EverDrive N8, which I just sold to my buddy John over there. But yeah, it loads it just fine.
Okay.
It works just like original hardware, and it even lets you hook up the Famicom disk system. What was that? No, they've only made a Nintendo one so far, but I mean, buy one from them and tell them, hey, I love your product. You ever consider making one for the, what was that thing that Sega made that competed against the NES but wasn't quite as good? The Master System, yeah. Because I don't know what's the progress right now on FPGAs for the 16-bit consoles. I haven't heard from that because, like, I mean, if I knew about that, I'd definitely make an SNES one since that's, like, the hottest item.
Now, this is actually something I can talk about.
Go ahead.
There are people who do bespoke, like Genesis cartridges and things like that. They're usually only...
Are you talking about flashcards?
Well, no.
That's not what we're talking
No,
about.
no. I mean, they're usually for specific projects.
Like homebrew?
Yeah.
No, he meant like an FPGA that's built to play the cartridges in HD or whatever.
No, I heard EverDrive. And
I mean,
bespoke cartridges.
the guy that programmed the Analog NT Mini. You know what? Let's try a different game. I have no faith in Kirby.
That's fair.
It's a little baby game, anyways.
Hey. Look. Yeah, praise the donut.
What was I saying?
Are you saying that Kirby sucks?
No, I'm saying that Kirby blows.
No.
Okay.
All right.
Dr. Mario, don't. Okay, it failed me.
Oh,
Okay.
God. Oh, God.
Give me a moment. Yeah, a moment. Let me blow properly. Okay.
Go figure, Mario went
Shut your
from
mouth,
plumber
John.
to doctor in 1 year. Of course it doesn't work right.
I hear officially he's not a plumber. Yay! Okay. So check out how sharp those pixels
Can
are.
we,
It's native 720p.
Can we get some music on this?
There is audio coming out of it. I put a light scan line filter on it, but you can disable that in the menu. No, it doesn't, John. You know what you're talking about.
Oh, God. Now it's not doing anything.
God damn it.
It might be your controller, too.
You think if it's the controller, swap it with the other one I brought. Where did I put it? It's in my backpack. It's right next to it. Yep. I was testing this thing all night yesterday, and I wasn't having any problems. And here you come with your bad luck. Okay. Huh? I think it's
Oh, no, it might
stuck.
just be frozen.
Give me a moment.
All right, well,
You know what game I know works? I know Super Mario Brothers works. Somewhat, but yeah.
hey, one of you
Does
700
anybody-
people on your phones, could you tell me what time it is?
Okay. Does anybody have one of those like little Q-tips with like the rubbing alcohol? Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So if you'll notice, there's a light scan line filter over it. You can enable that and disable that, and even adjust the intensity of the scan lines in the software menu for the ABS. That's a nice little feature. You can also adjust the width of the video, I think the overscan and underscan settings as well, and yeah. Yeah, and it's playing it straight off the cartridge, so if I were to rip it out right now, the whole thing would mess up, but you're already aware of that. Well, if you were playing on like a Retron 5, nothing would happen because it's just emulating it. But yeah. Oh man, that's a shameful display.
It is shameful.
Let's see.
You know how long it's been since I played Mario Brothers?
2 minutes?